Hi there. Actually, the number of realizations for the Church of Nowhere is 6, not 5. This was a late entry on meditation. I actually got this, that whatever the question, meditation is the answer, from a pin on Pinterest, which says, whatever the question, chocolate is the answer. But that's actually a topic for another video, in fact, for this channel. So we'll leave that to one side. In fact, actually, I find meditation very difficult because as soon as I try to calm myself down, my thoughts, you know, sort of leap over each other with even great abandon and tumble over each other. It's like a sort of torrent of thoughts, and I can't, I literally can't stop them really. In fact, meditation is a bit like a sort of dam. All you're doing really is damming up the water, and then when you come out of meditation, it's even worse than when you went into it. So really, I don't think meditation is quite the answer for me. Not Raja, not what they call Raja yoga, anyway, which is meditate yoga of the mind. I have to be doing something physical in order to meditate. So karma yoga and hatha yoga would be more my style, really. Anyway, the 5 realizations. There are 2 existential realizations. There's a realization that has a social dimension, and there's 2 realizations which have a pro-social or moral dimension to them. And one of them that for the pro-social moral dimension, as you already know, which is one of the pillars of the Church of Noah, which I should never have been born. That arises, well, it's actually the foundation of antinatalism. Now, this is not to say that you should go out and commit suicide or go out and kill your family or something like that, because you are where you are now. You are born, you are real and existent, to use Descartes' language, and there's not much you can do about that. But since future persons have no moral ontology, you really don't owe life to some generation that might or might not come after you. Which is a nice, comforting thought, really. And you can just bear that in mind. It's not that you can't look after children. You certainly can, and perhaps should look after children, other people's children. So you should adopt, because we've already looked at the fact that abortion, there is no moral justification for abortion. So if people are going to take that on board and not have abortions, then there are going to be children born who need looking after. But antinatalism is, of course, as someone reminded me the other day, is more than that. It is the conviction that you should not have been born because you are an agent of harm to this planet, to yourself, and to other sentient beings. Just by your existence and by all your wants and needs, which have to be met. And often they are met by causing harm to other sentient beings, and there's literally no way out of it. But we'll come on to that in a minute. So this is a kind of, you could say this is a very depressing realization that I shouldn't have been born, and you might say it's a statement of utter despair and victimization and victim mentality. And resentment, it could be said with a lot of resentment in your heart. I should never have been born, everything's terrible in my life. But it isn't that in your life. You shouldn't have been born because you're affecting other people's lives, you see. So it's nothing to do with you. It's not me. It's actually them. It's the poor people, in the developing countries, or the poor veal calves, or the poor, I don't know, poor other species that are all going to be made extinct because of human activity. So it's actually a sort of, it's a bit like, in the Hebrew prayer, I stand in judgment before you, Lord. It's a sort of self-judgment, a self-criticism, perhaps the ultimate self-criticism that you should never have been born. But as I said, since you have been born, you have to make the best of it. And you come on to this bit, which again is the moral dimension, is that you should cause minimal harm. And I will cause minimal harm. It's a sort of like an oath that you take. As I said, this is governed by the towards principle as well. So you might only be able to say, I will live towards this principle of causing minimal harm, but I don't think I'm going to be very good at it or very efficient at it. But I will try my best, and I will actually apply sacrifice or self-sacrifice to this principle of not causing harm to anything or trying to cause minimal harm as best I can. And so there are some things which I may have to give up, which I rather enjoy doing, such as making massive profits from my corporation in order to cause minimal harm to the environment and to other sentient beings, you see. So this is kind of like again, minimal living and veganism, towards veganism anyway, with the other two pillars of the Church of Nowhere. So now we come on to the purely social dimension, and this is a very controversial one. I am nobody. And this, I mean, the Americans would find this incredibly sacrilegious, heretical even. I am nobody, because everybody in America wants to become somebody. And all the people that go to join the X Factor line outside the studio, they all want to become somebody as well. They all want to win that million pound contract and be somebody. Be the person that won the X Factor or the American equivalent, and this being so, to say I am nobody and to create a positive statement out of this I am nobody, you might say I am nobody special, which is one thing, but I think that to say I am nobody, you might say, oh, this plays into victim mentality, and this is defeatist talk, and this is self-cynicism, and all this kind of stuff. It does imply I'm nobody special, but in fact, actually, I am nobody. I haven't got a soul in me. I'm not unique. I am just created through the process of accident, by the forces of chance alone. My brain is just a computer. My body is just a very complicated biochemical factory. I'm just as a result of certain evolutionary forces, let us say, and certain revolutionary forces. I'm also a social construct, in the sense that I'm a site of intersecting social forces, as well as Donzelot would have us believe, the neo-Marxist socialist sociologist of French ones, Donzelot. I am nobody. So, I have no uniqueness. And despite everybody saying I'm an individual, I'm just one of the sheeple, actually. When push comes to shove, I'll just do exactly the same as everybody else. I'll go exactly the same place as everybody else. I will begin and end like everybody else. And of course, we all begin in the womb and we end in the crematorium. And so therefore, as far as death is concerned, or with respect to death, we are nobody. We are just cannon fodder. We are consumer fodder, that's for sure. And then when we've outlived our consumerist potential, then it's time to get burnt in the crematorium. And in fact, actually, the whole of life is just one big Auschwitz, really. We are literally worked to death, and then just before death, we are sent to the gas chamber, which is the pharmaceutical companies, waging war on our bodies, and then we die, and then we go to the crematorium. And that, you may say, that's an ultra cynical. Oh my God! What do you mean? The whole of life is just Auschwitz? What about pleasure? What about McDonald's? What about Starbucks? Well, if they built Starbucks in Auschwitz, which they probably would have done if they'd given half a chance, or McDonald's in Auschwitz, that might have alleviated the pain and suffering of the Jews for a little while. But ultimately, they're all for the gas chamber and they're all for the crematorium, and they all know that. It's just that Starbucks and McDonald's in Auschwitz would have made people think that that life wasn't too bad. But life is actually that bad. You were right the first time, mate. And it's just that when you're drinking your Starbucks coffee you are sort of dulled. Your mind is dulled into acceptance of where you are, which is a concentration camp, which is a death camp in actual fact. So I am nobody. I am nobody special. I don't have a soul. Um, Nothing else has a soul either, actually, which you might say militates against this thing about not only doing minimal harm. I mean, it might be true that nothing does have a soul, but things go ow when you hurt them. So it's best not to hurt them or hurt yourself too much, because you are programmed to go ow. You're programmed to feel suffering and loss and grief and all this. So you shouldn't cause these things in other sentient beings, even if sentient beings actually don't have a soul. Okay, which is another belief of the Church of Nowhere, that there is no such thing as metaphysics. There is no soul or God or afterlife or hell or heaven or anything like that, or reincarnation. So now we come on to the existential realizations. And the first one, it goes back to when you were born. I am from nowhere. People might say, "Well, I'm from the genetic pool. I'm from the primordial biological soup. I'm from an ovum meeting a sperm, and the ovum being fertilized and DNA coming together to create the diploid state of DNA, which is the full complement of chromosomes, and that's so I do come from somewhere." But in actual fact, in terms of consciousness, in terms of thinking I am, you don't actually come from anywhere. Because I remember when I first became aware that I was thinking. I think it was like when I was very young, and I was in a playpen, I think, and I had playing with this grey toy, and I suddenly became aware that I was thinking about thinking. I was interacting with this toy. And I was actually thinking, I am interacting with this toy, which was a thought about a thought. And up until then, I can't remember anything. And presumably I had thoughts like, I am hungry, I am thirsty, I am cold, I am hot. And then I would cry and make a fuss, and the parents would come running and alleviate my suffering, on a temporary or permanent basis. That would be like, so then that was, but I can't remember that. I can't remember that because I wasn't thinking, I am thinking, you see what I mean? And I was talking to my partner about this, and she also said that she remembers a day, the very day, when she became aware that she was thinking, that she was an individual, that she was an I am, and she had an I, and she had an am. I think, therefore I am. She had a Cartesian moment. And I certainly have that. But before that, you don't remember anything. So in terms of consciousness, you actually come from nowhere, because you come from no consciousness, zero consciousness, zero self-consciousness, one might say. And you're heading towards death, basically, which is you're going into nothingness, which is basically not only that you won't be able to think I am, you won't be able to think at all, because you'll be dead. There'll be no brain activity at all. And that is extinction. And you can rebel against extinction as much as you like, but that's where we're heading. The great nothingness. The great, some people call it the great unknown, because they want to engender some sort of hope in their hearts. But you know, and I know, and the ancient Egyptians knew very well that extinction is forever. You are going towards nothingness, and therefore you are a nobody with respect to death. But on the other hand, and we come back up here to the moral dimension, some deaths take forever. So, there's a lot of suffering to dying, for example, and dying is actually worse than death in many ways. So we have a moral obligation to make people's deaths as painless as possible, and as speedy as possible, and as non-frightening as possible, and maybe even to somehow address the meaninglessness of death by some means. But really, I don't think there is much you can do about that. Nihilism should really bring its own meaning to you anyway. So it's a kind of like an existential um, acceptance of annihilation, which is its own comfort, or should be its own comfort, and kind of liberating as well, that you won't be reincarnated or judged after death or anything like that. There is just rest in peace. R.I.P. R.I.P. human race. R.I.P. you and me. Unless, of course, you're one of these people that wants to cryogenically freeze themselves in order so that they can come back from the dead, as it were, and be reincarnated by the power of science, and because they're super rich people, and they really don't want, they really know that their super richness won't go with them. They can't take their millions with them, and so they're bloody well going to make sure that they come back in some shape or form. Because otherwise, what on earth is the point of being a super rich person if you really can't take it with you? You should be able to bring it back, and bring your consciousness back from coma or death, in order to go on enjoying your millions for another 100 years or whatever. But then when we talk about morality, given the fact that there is no life after death, again, it's incumbent on us to cause no harm, no suffering, and to try to make people and other sentient beings live as long as they possibly can. For example, the turkey that you're going to have for Thanksgiving. I mean, no, they can live up to 40 years, like a lot of birds. But you're just going to have them die very quickly, very soon, and not perhaps very quickly either, which is a very good reason why you shouldn't go and order your turkey for Thanksgiving. You should, in fact, not eat turkey on Thanksgiving or any other day, because of the moral dimension. You should cause minimal harm. But then, of course, you're going to say, well, if wasn't for certain animals being farmed, other species would go extinct, and that would be causing harm to a whole species of plant or animal, because there weren't any sheep in the fields or cows or anything like that. And I agree that is then something that you are presented with as a moral dilemma that you have to solve in some practical way. You have to conserve the species that only exist because man has farmed the land for 10,000 or more years. So that would be something that you'd have to do something about if you were not going to eat animals or drink milk, or eat beef and drink milk, for example. But I've covered that before. So I hope that I've shown you, that there are 6 realizations. And as I say, we come back to meditation. Meditation, is the answer to every question. If you go into meditation, which is another pillar of the Church of Nowhere, and you ask, certain amount of these questions, you ask perhaps, am I anybody, for example, and you might get an answer from your meditation, which is not the answer that I present in this video. And if that is the case, then maybe you should go with that rather than the contents of this video, because I realize that this video is rather too, will make some people very uncomfortable. But it's not meant to make you uncomfortable. It's in fact meant to liberate you from lies, and deliver you unto truth.